In 1977, a man named George Lucas introduced us all to Star Wars, a Shakespearean tale of good versus evil, love, courage and bravery, hope, and adventure. A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi became synonymous with masterful storytelling. Then came time for Lucas to conclude his original plan with the prequels that gave us memorable characters but ultimately ended up being a bit of a mess, although able to tell the clear story he hoped to. We all thought the Empire was vanquished, but came another threat.
Things sure have a way of working out smoothly, am I right, guys? Oh, man.
Disney's Star Wars was born in 2015 with The Force Awakens, pursued by The Last Jedi, culminating in the abysmal finale that was The Rise of Skywalker. A trilogy that not only brought back everything you loved of the original, but dared to torture and kill it all right before your very eyes.
That is one big pile of shit.
Disney killed the franchise, alienated the core fans, and when that wasn't enough, don't even get me started on this one, decided to resurrect a dead corpse with The Mandalorian, whose first season felt like a breath of fresh air until you realized it was all just nostalgia-filled smoke and mirrors. The Book of Boba Fett, an unnecessary, poorly written show that literally had Mando save us from boredom. None of that could prepare us for what came next. Obi-Wan Kenobi, doing to Obi-Wan in 6 episodes what TLJ did in 150 minutes to Luke Skywalker. The final majorly beloved character in the franchise was gone.
Hey, Party Marte. I know you.
Come on, man.
However, in 2016, Disney Star Wars suffered an anomaly.
What is that?
Rogue One, a Star Wars story, who, despite its flaws, has solidified itself as the House of Mouse's best work with the license, a self-contained story about a group of outcasts banding together, laying down their lives for the rebellion. Which brings us to Andor, a spin-off about Cassian Andor, one of the men who sacrificed his life in Rogue One. Before we start, I'd like to say I had no expectations at all and hadn't even seen the trailers, but I heard it was good, so I gave it a try. And man, it was a pleasant surprise. Spoilers ahead for the first 3 episodes of Star Wars Andor. Set 5 years before the events of Rogue One, we follow Andor in search of his sister, eventually getting caught up in something much bigger, the fight against the Empire, going from thief to revolutionary and finally, member of the rebellion. Plot-wise, everything has been fairly streamlined, leaving more room for the world building than we've seen in most other Disney properties of late, not without lacking issues, so let's jump right in. On Morlana 1, Cassian, who is originally from Kenari, looks for his sister who seemingly worked in a brothel in the Leisure Zone. He learns that she moved on and unwillingly pisses off a couple of sentry guards who harass him after leaving the establishment. Cassian ends up accidentally killing one and executing the other not to leave any witnesses, then escapes back to Ferrix. The first sequence really sets the tone of the show, giving us insight on what it's like to live under Imperial rule and how those who are supposed to enforce their rules are more corrupt and disorderly when further from the core Empire regime. Cassian arrives on Ferrix and starts covering his tracks, asking his friend Brasso, who works in a scrapyard, to be his alibi. We get a sort of day-in-the-life glimpse of how Ferrix is like, getting introduced to B2EMO, the cutest fucking droid in Star Wars, owned by Cassian's adoptive mother. And man, it feels good to see practical sets and a location that isn't Tatooine. Back on Morlana 1, we get the best scene of the first episode. The report has been brought up by Cyril, Deputy Inspector, to Chief Hine of the 2 dead guards. The former wants to pursue the killer and bring him to justice as a way to uphold the Empire's values, while the latter dismisses the case because he's on his way to an Imperial Regional Command review where the Empire expects no concerns raised from its proxy planets, including high crime rates. The deaths will be staged as sacrifices, preserving the integrity of the Empire and its subordinates.
We don't need a parade. They died being helpful. Something sad but inspiring in a mundane sort of way.
This is one of the perfect scenes of the show. Here's why. A scene needs to do 3 things. Develop characters, move the story forward, and give us information. Not only does this one do all 3, but in a subtle manner. We have a multi-layered understanding of who Cyril is from a first introduction. It obviously moves the story forward and conveys the most information we receive on the Empire's rule. Ranks and their functionality, the limited grasp of authority the Empire has on further planets, and autonomy of these systems. Despite the Chief's orders, he decides to pursue the investigation and sends out a bulletin to Ferrix to search for a man from Kenari for questioning. We get more insight of how well-oiled the Empire machine is despite the zone's autonomy, and how most of the workers are normal people.
Find it. Whatever it is, I want to know when it left and where it went.
You'd have to filter the entire night.
Well, if it's too much for you, let me know. I'm sure somebody wants the chair.
On Ferrix, Cassian meets Bix, a mechanic friend who will contact a black market buyer to sell a Starpath unit he has, which is a valuable piece of Imperial navigation technology, to raise money and leave. Oh, and we meet Tim, supposedly Bix's boyfriend. More insight is given on Cassian as a swindler who's on his final straw with most of his friends.
Come on, Pegler. No. We're done. No more favors, no more deals.
Sprinkled throughout the episode is a flashback of Cassian's life as a kid on Canary, a tribal planet where they use primitive weapons and almost exclusively kids are the sole inhabitants of his tribe. An Imperial ship crashes and warriors of the tribe suit up to go find the remains. It appears to be Cassian's first time joining them on an expedition, as some are reluctant to let him do so. While exploring, we find out Canary was an old mining planet seemingly abandoned by the Empire. On Ferrix, news starts spreading about the Bulletin searching for a Canarian man. Bix finds out about it, but her secrecy towards Tim makes him suspect she might be having an affair with Andor. Cassian is informed about the Bulletin by his adoptive mother, Marva, who's hid his identity as Canarian. She's a very stern person when it comes to her son's safety, fearing more for it than wanting to know and reprimand his actions.
Who else knows
About what?
that you were born in Canary?
You don't want to hear what happened?
We'll get to that, but who knows? Who have we told?
Bix and Cassian meet up in a bar to discuss the buyer situation, but are spied on by a drunk Tim who, out of jealousy, tips Morlana one of Cassian's origins. Cyril, with the help of the woman from the brothel, is able to confirm Andor's identity. Here is the first nitpick I have with the show. Why would the woman from the brothel be brought in for questioning in the middle of the night without Cyril at that point knowing they had a suspect? Yes, it's to let the audience know she'll help identify Cassian, but in context of the story, it doesn't make sense for her to be there. Cyril calls in Sergeant Linus to mobilize a ground team for Ferrix to capture Andor, who has a violent record with the Empire. Linus does a bit of ego stroking for Cyril with small pieces of dialogue like,
Velocity in the service of inspired leadership? Is there a worthy substitute? I think not.
The thought of anything less than full engagement on a case like this.
Unconscionable, sir. Dereliction of duty at the minimum. Privilege, sir. Got the brief on the ride in.
Although he was awoken in the middle of the night, and he manages to hit all the right notes, making Cyril feel his decisions to be even more necessary and meaningful than he previously thought, deciding to move on the field with Linus and his team. His confidence is maxed out right now, but quickly wavers once he realizes what he got himself into, and the threshold at which the soldiers will go to accomplish the mission, as seen by his speech. It's a complete role reversal of who he was just a scene before.
There's no room for doubt on the path to success and justice. Best of luck to us all.
The Empire is on its way to Ferrix, the mystery buyer arrives, and Andor preps his things to meet him and leave. We do get some clunky exposition and repetition on Canary in this scene, which raises questions. How are these guys able to find out where Canary was located and the planet's purpose, if just a couple of scenes before people working for the Empire couldn't, hinting at the audience that maybe the planet was wiped off maps. Small flashback to Canary. Young Cassian and his tribe make it to the crash site, but a surviving soldier manages to kill their leader, which is weird because why didn't you shoot the only guy who was moving around like a zombie to protect your leader? Especially now that we know it's an Imperial ship and the children know what Imperial people look like. After the leader is shot and they manage to kill the soldier, everyone evacuates her. Why? Wouldn't the team split up, half exploring the wreck while the other takes her back to the village? Here is where writing for the sake of plot came through in the script. If everyone hadn't evacuated, then Andor wouldn't have explored the ship alone so Marva can save him. Yeah, alright. Another issue, to initiate the flashback sequence, Marva picks up the staff Cassian had when he was a kid on Canary. Now, for someone who doesn't want to be associated with Canary at all, why not hide it? Because if the wrong person saw that, I can imagine there would be severe consequences, or else why hide the fact that Cassian is from that planet? Back on Ferrix, Cassian and the buyer known as Luthen meet, the latter trying to persuade him into joining the rebellion, while the soldiers deploy, raiding Marva's home. Andor tries communicating with B2EMO, but ends up letting the soldiers trace his location. Something I really appreciate in this show is the level of competence that these soldiers have, not only in their tactics but their individual actions and orders. Never in a million years would I think Disney could portray men as competent.
Oh my God!
Biggs finds out Tim ratted out Cassian and goes looking for him but runs into soldiers who capture her. Andor and Luthen get surrounded. Luthen detonates a bomb while surrounding soldiers were waiting for reinforcements. They manage to take down all except one and make their escape, losing the Starpath unit in the process. The remaining soldier catches up and warns the rest of the party, deciding to stand their ground and ambush Andor and Luthen. Meanwhile, the people of Ferrix deploy intimidation tactics by banging on pieces of metal in the city. Tim finds Biggs caught by the guards and while confronting them is met by a trigger-happy recruit who's immediately disarmed and sent off the battlefield to provide air support. Cassian and Luthen arrive at the ambush but are able to kidnap Cyril while they get a speeder to leave. The recruit sent for air support gets caught in a trap laid by Brasso, losing control and crashing the vehicle. Using a decoy speeder, Andor and Luthen are able to wipe out almost all the remaining soldiers and escape, leaving Cyril with a failed mission and more than half his team dead. Everything established had been leading to this path, and episode 3 feels like the catalyst for the rest of the show, as from here everyone will suffer repercussions. Cyril for his botched mission and misuse of Empire forces, bringing in the unwanted attention of the upper echelon warned on by the chief. Ferrix for protecting Andor and its involvement in the soldiers' deaths will be used as an example for the other sectors. Finally, Andor having to deal with the weight of his actions that will affect his home as well as his new role supposedly in the rebellion. Oh, and final flashback from Kenari is Marva also scavenging the wrecked ship, finding and kidnapping young Cassian to protect him from the repercussions of the Empire. The final shot is him waking up in Marva's ship, staring at the sunlight being flown away from Kenari. It's touching and all, mirroring him escaping in present day. Both instances are him on the verge of starting a new life, but wouldn't he be screaming or trying to get off the ship to, I don't know, get back to his sister or planet? Not calmly look at the sun and smile at your kidnappers? I've heard lots of people call the show boring and too slow. I agree that it's a slow burn that could have its scenes shortened, but I don't understand how some say entire sequences should have been cut. For now, every scene has served one of the aforementioned purposes. Develop a character, give us information, and or move the story forward. Of course, not every scene pulls off those three things at the same time, but all succeed in doing one, albeit most are world building, so giving info, making me understand where most of you are coming from. Here's the question we've all been waiting for. Is Andor genuinely good, or do we perceive it as good because we've been fed constant mediocrity for what feels like an eternity? To be fair, a bit of both. When mediocre is where the bar is set, anything above average is seen as a masterpiece, but Andor does too much good worth talking about and deserves its positive reviews. It's a competently written, well-directed debut, and to say otherwise would be doing it a disservice. On the character side, we mainly have Andor and Cyril, with Cyril being the most interesting and promising so far. Cassian is introduced as more of a desperate and cowardly person, but always manages to put up a front when with other people who see him as a smooth-talking swindler, but feels more like a battered dog when running from the mess he made. All of his actions are made out of necessity, but will always choose the easy, sometimes unheroic way out, leaving lots of room for improvement to get to the person we see at the beginning of Rogue One, where he goes through his redemption arc. Diego Luna's performance is a bit mixed, but it may stem from Cassian's character not being very fleshed out, because he has the subtlety in his acting with scenes like his first kill, but most of the times gives off a generic feeling performance. I know he's capable of giving more based off a couple of scenes here and his previous films, so I hope he'll manage to deliver in the coming episodes. Cyril was easily the best character in the show and the one I'm most looking forward to seeing throughout the season. He starts out as the opposite of Andor, very confident and stern. Patriotic to the Empire, ready to prove his loyalty to the higher-ups and move up in rank. He cares about keeping the Empire's image intact, pushing him to pursue Cassian. His character has a lot of fine moments, whereas every time we see him in his element commanding people behind the screen, he's the best there is. But once shit gets real and his ego stroked to the point where he feels nothing can go wrong, everything does miserably. His character constantly decreasing in confidence as the episodes drag on, making me wonder in which direction the writers will take him after episode 3's massive loss. Kyle Soller is absolutely fantastic in the role, grabbing my attention every time he's on screen. The score was pretty solid and really set the mood once the first episode started. My only problem is that it gets increasingly overused the more the episodes go on, the third one being the worst case. But that's a minor critique and doesn't take away from the main story, although as I've said in some of my other reviews, score nowadays is used as a safety net manipulating the audience with what to feel. Thankfully, Andor doesn't fall into that trap. Some would say the score doesn't feel like Star Wars, but I think it's a pretty good blend of old and new, not just recycling what came before like the sequel trilogy and Kenobi. Cinematography was one of the highlights of the show, as it felt like someone's singular vision injecting some much needed creativity into the franchise. Not to mention, you can actually fucking feel that this was shot outside on a built set rather than a closed studio with stagecraft technology. Don't get me wrong, stagecraft technology can work in the right hands. Just look at the Batman for example, but Disney uses it as a cheap alternative so they don't spend on practical set pieces. Andor's filmmaking style resulted in some gorgeous looking shots and is #1 on the list of visually pleasing TV shows on their entire streaming service. Yes, Marvel included. Nothing about this show looks cheap, despite having the allegedly lowest reported budget out of all the others, because showrunner Tony Gilroy opted for minimal CGI and a return to fully practical. Jesus, why isn't this guy the head of Lucasfilm? The show doesn't have any major editing issues like Rings of Power, although the 3-episode arc could have been cut into one movie-length episode, which I think would have been a better draw-in for more casual viewers who felt the first 2 episodes were too slow. I personally really enjoyed the premiere of Andor. I find that Star Wars still has enormous untapped potential when it comes to showing life outside the Skywalker sphere on film format, especially during the rule of the Empire, so I'm glad to see competent media being made about it. Of course, we had the expanded universe, but someone decided to decanonize it. The show is ultimately for everyone, albeit a more mature audience. I do think you'll enjoy it a bit more as a Star Wars fan, but it's a pretty interesting sci-fi slow burn. Yes, I'd recommend, but, let's all tread lightly. We've been hurt too many times by the flames, so no need sticking our hands back into the fire. Hopefully it keeps the same level of quality throughout on the writing and direction, and who knows, maybe we're witnessing a Disney Star Wars redemption arc? Thanks for watching, and once again for sticking around this long. Do consider subscribing, and hopefully, I'll see you all next time.